Hey everyone, welcome to Built in Public. I'm your host, Adam Perlis, founder of V150, the professional social network for Gen AI builders and creators. And on this show, we talk to creators about building in the open, from vibe coders and designers to filmmakers, marketers, and musicians and more. And whether it's a tool, a product, a piece of art, these are the builders leveraging Gen AI to turn ideas into things we actually use and love and talk about. And today, I'm joined by Emmet, the SVP of Design at Intercom. We're going to be talking about how AI is fundamentally changing how design teams and organizations function. This is Built in Public. Let's get into it. Welcome, Emmet.
Hey, Adam. Nice to be here. Thank you for having me on.
Thanks for being here, Emmet. We really appreciate your time. So I wanted to kind of set this up a little bit for people. Do you mind introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about your background?
Yeah. So I'm Emmet. I run the design team at Intercom. As you mentioned, I've kind of held that role for quite a while, over 10 years now. It's definitely been different eras and almost the feeling of different companies within that. But over that time, yeah, I've seen a lot of different changes in how we've run things, no more so than in recent years. How AI, as you mentioned, is changing a lot of how we're doing things across product design, brand design, growth design, web, everything really. Before that, I was a designer by trade myself. I worked at Google on a whole bunch of projects there that we can get into if that's older stuff is still relevant. And yeah, I'm based here in the west of Ireland. Intercom has an office in Dublin. And so that's me in a nutshell.
Amazing. Well, thank you, Emmet. It's so great to have you here, and your expertise is just extraordinary. And I think it will be really valued by our audience. So, I wanted to talk about this. In my mind, your team is like truly redefining what a design team looks like and works like in an organization. And you guys even published an amazing article called Intercom's 3-point framework for AI-driven design. And I'm going to pop that into our show notes for those of you who do want to read it. But if you could give us a little background of what inspired you to write this article.
I mean, the short version is a kind of a sense that someone's got to figure this out. And I think the desire to start conversing in public about what it is, we have been trying to do a lot of figuring out about how to evolve, or what the opportunities to evolve our design team are. And so really it was written in part to put a stake in the ground and an update on where we're at. We have a tradition, I think, at Intercom, almost through our blog and speaking and so on, of like sharing with other people what we're learning about how we're working and so on. So in many ways that was part of that, but it seems to have really caught on, honestly, and a lot of people are asking the same questions and very keen, I have come to learn, to hear more. That was what probably prompted us to sit down and like put pen to paper in the first place and share it. I mean, it's probably a much longer answer in terms of what led us to deciding we wanted to make that change for the company.
I just talked to Emmet Connoly. He's the SVP of design over at Intercom, and his team trained their designers to become design engineers. And now they can take on work that used to sit in a long engineering backlog, and they move faster, ship more, and unblock the entire company. This shift matters because fewer engineering dependencies means lower cost and more speed. Design engineers bring creativity, execution, and product sense in one person. Developers have an opportunity here too. They already know the hard part. They understand front end, back end, scalability, quality, and security. If they learn design and user experience, they become incredibly valuable to a company. A developer who can design is almost impossible to pass on. Same for designers. Learn how to code with Gen AI tools, and you become this amazingly valuable resource to a company. I went through that path myself. I started in a business, spent years and years designing, taught myself even a little bit about coding, and now I'm vibe coding full-on products. I built V150 entirely myself. Now, if you want your team to learn how to do this stuff, and you might be facing a lot of opposition inside of your organization, and you need someone to help you lead that cultural shift and that technical shift, upskilling your team, teaching them how to work inside of a development sandbox, how to set up your GitHub, how to train them on the right tooling to use for different situations. I'm offering those services personally as a consultant. So if you're interested, please do reach out. Thanks for listening. Absolutely. Well, I can say for one that, Intercom's long been a design team that I've admired. I followed your very early guides on how to really hire the right type of product designer when I was forming my company Academy, which is a staffing and recruiting agency. And really, it was instrumental in us figuring out our process and how we look for talent. So thank you for continuing to lead the charge on that. I think one of the things that you talked about in your article that I think is so interesting is like this moment where you realized that traditional designers had to change. Like what was that like for you guys and how did you make this decision as an organization?
Mm. I guess to like summarize the article super briefly, it is it is talking about our efforts within primarily our product design team, but we have similar efforts in other disciplines within design as well. But primarily for product design to evolve the type of work that we do from a like Figma, boxes and rectangles drawing thing to much more engaging with building or mocking stuff up using AI. This is not an original thing that we're exploring. Lots of designers are exploring it. To, I think in a sense, a lot of people have maybe mentioned to me that it feels like we're one or two steps further along the path of figuring that out than other people. I think to answer your question, the reason where it started from was because we started quite early. We've been building customer service software, right, for a long time, for many years, hammering away on a lot of the like intractable problems of that space. Like what happens when you questions in different languages? And, we keep getting the same questions again. Is there a more efficient way of answering them? And things like this, right? And we have tried, even we had a machine learning team and tried many ML driven ways of answering that. It wasn't until, the generative AI era, if you like post ChatGPT, that we realized that we had this massive opportunity to solve permanently almost a bunch of those intractable problems. So we really jumped on that. We shipped the first iteration of Finn, which initially was our natural language question answering chatbot and has since then evolved into a complete AI agent for customer service. And we're going to keep expanding that into like kind of all your customer interactions. So we were really in the space, and when ChatGPT specifically landed, it was like super clear. Wow, that's maps extremely well to a lot of the things that we're trying to do. And even to this day, I think that like coding and customer service are probably the two big existing disciplines that are going to be first impacted in terms of the work and how the work needs to change. Whereas I do believe still something like design and what we're trying to figure out within our team is trailing that to a certain extent. And it's just the nature of what the models are great at, right?
Yep.
Writing code, writing prose, answering questions, reformatting, translating, blah, blah, blah. So we were in the mix working with the technology pretty early. And I think there were a couple of like ratcheting, like I think all of us probably have these moments of like ratcheting realization of like what AI is. You tried ChatGPT for the first time and then you whatever, right? Vibe coded something for the first time. You were like, wow, this is incredible. Um, and there were probably a few of those along the way for us. Some of them were just playing with the technology to code stuff. Then there was this kind of surprising moment. It's so recent, but almost hard to cast your mind back. I remember we were working with like large language models. Sounds like they should be good at working with text, right? And then these image generators like Midjourney started to appear, and you were like, holy shit. These things
Yeah.
can do other things beyond text manipulation. And of course, now that's going into robotics and cars and like every other place. And so you realize this is truly a general purpose technology, and any general purpose technology is going to change dramatically, like all the jobs in knowledge work, including design. Once you start to like, again, have these ratcheting moments, you go, oh my God, I'm really like beholden now. And the onus is on me to dig in and understand this deeper. And that is it. Finding the rabbit hole that's adjacent to what you work on, diving down it, and just once you keep going, I think you realize there is no bottom in sight. And so we're in this kind of scary middle ground now, right? I actually talked to some people and they're like, well, we haven't figured out the terminus of where this rabbit hole goes yet, what design will become. I definitely think one of the animating principles behind what we're doing is like we're going to have to figure this out as we go, not wait for it to come to some logical like resolution or conclusion. And so that is really where it's come from. It has been like understanding that I think it's also a pure curiosity, interest thing. Like it is interesting to figure out what the frontier of design is or how the design role is going to change. Yes, of course, I think it's a competitive edge for us and the work that we do within our company. Yes, I want to set our designers up to succeed and help them, figure out how to make the most of the technology for themselves and their careers. But it's fascinating also. And so I'm keen to, and I've discovered that putting your ideas out there attracts other people who have the same ideas, and then you get to snowball those ideas better. So I hope we can kind of, in some small part, collectively figure this out as we go.
Yeah, I remember that was one of the ways that I heard about you for the first time was because you had posted an accidental experiment that you were doing with like AR, kit, I think.
Right. Yeah.
And and you just came up with something cool by accident and you were like, I'm gonna share this with people. But I love that. I love that spirit of experimentation. I think that also sounds like it was really carried throughout your team and you helped, really maybe even inspire that. One of the things I want to talk about, which you started to talk about and alluded to, is this changing power dynamic. I think that for a long time, product and engineering have been the leaders of the pack when it comes to decision making in most organizations. It appears now that design is evolving quite a bit. Right now, designers are going to be responsible for not just designing an experience, thinking about the user experience, in many cases, researching for the experience, translating ideas into actual, screens. But now also be responsible for coding a lot of those experience, in some cases, both front end and back end. And it appears that the role of engineering may need to shift, that it may actually be a more supervisory capacity, ensuring that the LLMs are spitting out code that actually is coherent or is safe or is compliant or any number of other things, right? Isn't going to break our entire system. And I'm curious about how, at Intercom, which is a pretty sizable company. And I think so many companies will face this massive pushback from the development team and maybe even the product team from designers getting their hands, their creative little hands into their GitHub repos. And I'm curious to hear about what that was like because that seems fascinating.
Yeah, I have learned from talking to many people about this since then as well that there are lots of different versions of this story, and a lot of it depends on the culture and company context. Like for example, in Intercom, we were co-founded by designers, and have always had a kind of a strong design-centric culture, and so maybe that makes it easier in some way culturally. I don't know, for us to like stick our neck out internally in this way, but uh okay, let me think about the different ways to answer your question. First of all, I think Intercom has always been very amenable to these types of experiments and change. We've always been like curious about what's at the frontier of how we work. And we have had to change from a SaaS company into basically an AI product company, right? And you can't do that and go deep like that, retool your product offering for a new AI first world and not realize, oh shit, everyone who's making a tool for every role is doing the same thing here as well. And so my role is going to change too. So there's some kind of like you can't block out the outside world when you're in the thick of
Right.
building a product for that space. Um, our PMs and engineers are also like experimenting dramatically. Lots of the PMs are vibe coding. They have had vibe code hackathons and are using it for all sorts of different things. And obviously, I think basically every engineer at Intercom is using some form of AI assisted coding right now as well. And we've had all sorts of internal kind of call to arms and so on to adopt these tools and experiment wildly. So number one is there's the permission is there, the permission to experiment. And like again, talking to people, I realize somewhat foreign to me. Honestly, I've been a long time in Intercom, but I realize like not every company has that. I'm not sure how to respond to that, except to say that like um I think everyone has probably got their own personal, like, what's the word? Confidence meter for how big a deal this change is gonna be. And if the environment that you're sitting in is one that does not like where the environment's confidence meter is totally at odds with yours, i.e., if you're like super bullish that AI is gonna change how design works, and your company is saying, "Well, I'm not seeing it back in your box," at some point, you've got to think about whether it's the right environment. In terms of making the case, I think it's, whatever that saying is, it's very hard to convince someone to change their mind if their salary depends on them not changing their mind, right? So, I think it's very
True.
difficult to, like, appeal to someone on a pure, like, logic basis. I think you have to not get permission, but step outside of the boundaries of your role, be willing to burn a day or 2 of effort, perhaps in secret. But if you come back and you're like, "Check out what's actually tangibly valuable, and I can show it to you," I
Yeah.
think that is the most convincing argument in a scenario like that, right? So that's the kind of
Yeah.
cultural permission thing if it doesn't exist already. Does
Yeah.
that make
I
sense?
think that, yeah, it absolutely does. I mean, I think that, Intercom is definitely a company that, has the cultural setup for this to be successful early, like you are, right? And I don't know that every company does. Actually, I think a majority of companies, like 90% of companies, probably do not.
Yeah.
But I think it's so inspiring to see what you guys are doing, because to me, it's the obvious natural future, and I'm kind of curious, like, because obviously, like, you guys led this cultural shift, and I think it's wonderful your advice, by the way, to other, design leaders, that just get in there and start trying, and then just prove that you can do it, right? Just show it. Like, you take it to your boss, take it to the CEO, whoever it is that needs to see this, and show them the thing that you made. And that is enough proof to at least get the wheels turning on making this cultural shift. I'm curious if you have any other tips about, helping inspire a cultural shift in the company, that you saw maybe work in your own.
Yeah. Um, well, I mean, it can't hurt to have a leader who's kind of like banging the drum and giving you the explicit permission to do this, right? And
Yeah.
maybe that's someone in design or your product org or whatever it might be to do that. I would say as well, like a lot of people, you asked me about and I get this, well, what do the engineers think?
Yeah.
This kind of question, right? Like they must be horrified at what you're proposing. Okay, let's talk about that for a second. First of all,
Sure.
like again, might be intercom specific, but like we are here's the opening salvo, let's say, of us proposing to do this. Hey, you know that giant, never-ending backlog of P3 UI quality bugs that has been sitting there forever, and that your engineers hate to fix, and that you're constantly going, "What are we gonna do?" And you're always triaging it, but it never goes away. And but what if like we just tackled a whole bunch of those, right? Or what if we didn't have to burn all this time, like sending you red lines and you fix it, and you're like, no, another 2 pixels to the left, and so on. Like you're pushing against an open door there.
Yeah, that must be
Okay,
their
right?
nightmare,
So
a
start
designer sitting
small and
behind them.
yeah, start simple and start where you can't like, where the blast radius of your screw ups are probably pretty small, right? Um,
Right.
and I can talk about how maybe some things to encourage designers like on how to get started with that. And then I think just keep pushing at it. And honestly, this sounds dumb, but sometimes things are simple. Keep pushing at how much you feel like it's possible to take on until someone says, "Whoa, hold your courses there. Like, stop. What are you doing?" And
Right.
I have discovered that you can push pretty far through the stages of how advanced that this gets. Um, we, for example, have got designers who have not just like all of our designers. Okay, back in Q2, we said let's try and get all designers to ship a pull request, a PR, a code change that actually goes to production, and everyone did. Like 20 something product designers all did it. Um,
Wow.
and a lot of them were like, "Wow, that was kind of easier than I thought." Now, I just changed copy or a tiny CSS tweak or whatever. But then they go back and
Sure.
do it again, and before long, you have like meaningful enough quality of life or UI jank issues being resolved. So that's kind of the next thing. It's like, oh, there's a bunch of code, not just two characters being changed. And
Right.
then it goes all the way up to, and this might depend a lot, by the way, on your internal tooling and so on, but can you build entire pieces of like core product functionality or net new product screens, if that's what you need, with your design system and UI components, with a designer essentially like not vibe coding because you're in production code, but using cursor and talking to cursor, not writing a lot of code either, but using
Right.
cursor to assemble the components to build something like functional. And that's kind of where we're at on the capability curve. You went a bit
Yeah.
further than that, and I did even in my article as well, saying, who knows where this goes, folks? And this is where we're getting a bit more like hypothetical
Yeah.
or whatever. If you extrapolate from here, maybe dot dot dot, maybe this
Sure.
is going to like designers owning the entirety of the front end. You know what I mean? And like building the
Mm.
whole interactive surface, the GUI, whatever you want to call it,
Right.
and then interfacing with engineers more like to populate that with real data, to trigger real API calls or whatever. So there's some like logical handoff point. And I guess we're kind of one searching for what that logical handoff point is, but also pushing
Yeah.
to see how far into that world design can go. And by the way, this is not just like a land grab for design who are like, oh, maybe
Yeah.
our job is going away. Let's take theirs before we take it. What we're really looking for is what's the more sensible dividing line between this experience we're trying to design and craft and get just right and all like pixel perfect and
Right.
it feels really good and smooth. And like it feels like more of the crafting of that experience could and should live with designers. And that's a more efficient
Yeah.
and like better handoff point than these very awkward, like back and forth bug fixing or trying to get the polish working or whatever. Now, earlier
Sure.
you posited, hey, maybe designers even on the back end, and that's an even step further. And who knows if something like that would ever happen. I think if
Yeah.
you do, the kind of designer engineer um, distinction becomes meaningless. And I have heard people talking about, maybe we should just temporarily consider ourselves to be like builders or makers, and we're all the same
Yeah.
thing. Um, that is all TBD. Let's see how it all continues to play out. That can be a blog post for next year. Maybe we'll check back in and how we're doing.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's the evolution that I've been seeing. I think also known as a design engineer is like the new role and terminology that I think a lot of companies are throwing around. Yeah, I mean, I think it's fascinating. I mean, one of the things I want to bring up is engineers, like, I think have this natural, not all, but many engineers will have this natural reaction to be like, no way, like design's not going to take my job. What are you talking about? And to be honest, they're right. They're right. It will not. There will be parts of it, yes, that I think it can, right? Like you said, those P3 issues, simple, easy fixes, a
Yeah,
lot of the GUI stuff. In fact, most engineers don't really love doing that stuff, to
yeah,
be honest. Um, but I think that there are extraordinarily complex, systems that need to be built. And if you are not from an engineering background, you are likely not going to think about all of those things. I know this because when I was building B150, like I come from mostly a design background. I have some background in React, and I used to, a little bit of like Ruby on Rails, but I'm not a developer, right? I just happen to know a little bit about it, and that knowledge and expertise has supremely helped me as I've tried to build an extraordinarily complex platform. I don't think every designer is really there yet, and it may be some time before that happens. But I do believe that there will be a time where, like you said, designers can be shipping true production level full features, right? That they have owned start to finish. But I don't think that happens in a vacuum. I think that has to happen in collaboration with engineering teams and product teams to ensure, one, that it's viable from a business standpoint,
Yep.
two, viable from a user standpoint, three, that it's viable from a technical and engineering standpoint, and four, that, compliance, safety, security, all those other things are also thought about when deploying something like this. Because it can be table stakes, right? It could be huge implications if it goes wrong. And certainly, as a designer who vibe codes, you don't want to be on the hook for that. But I think any org needs to see those people, yes, working in conjunction, but maybe just a little bit differently than the way that they worked before.
yeah. I think you're getting into some of the nooks and crannies of like I'm describing what's the new like handoff line or the new dividing line between design. And I think
Yeah,
it is stuff like, okay, you can get the front end to work like today, you can get the front end to work, but what
sure.
about security and authentication and cleaning up data and all these kinds of things? And I am
Testing.
definitely not for to be clear as well, like advocating for yeah, that should be what designers do now or learn to do, or designers need to
Sure.
learn all these like super deep technical and security concepts and so on. So again, it's not designers like displacing engineers, but it's figuring out a new handoff point. It is also interesting to think, okay, I am of a suitable vintage that like I kind of started out in my career as a webmaster, like back in the late
Oh,
90s,
wow, wow. Oh,
late
yeah.
90s, early 2000s, right? And what was that? That was like a computer person who kind of knew how to design and build websites. And and,
Right.
and our industry grew out of that, and eventually got like scaled up and sliced into many different specialities so that we could scale, because one person can't do the thing that like teams of hundreds of people who are broken up into specialities can do. And so that is the arc that we have gone on as an industry, as you know the 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 web 2.0 stuff, and then big tech and whatever you want to call like the last decade or whatever of SaaS and so on has happened. And there's definitely a sense of like a closing of that arc now, and we're starting a new kind of journey. But in a way, I think there's this natural resetting back to, okay, you kind of have to like generalize, be able to hold everything in your head and kind of understand quite an end to end thing. I think it's going to be very difficult for someone to be, for example, like, I was a narrow specialization before, like, I'll just put like a visual designer, and I expect to like slot into the new world as a visual designer as well. I think we all kind of have to pass through a bit of a generalist phase and then understand if there even is a visual designer role, like subspecialty on the other side of this, what the new shape of that is. And you might just find that like your role is different or broader or differently shaped and so on. I realize that a lot of people have like a little bit of anxiety or fear about leaving behind what has served them really well and they've worked really hard to get to in their career and so on. Um, I don't know why I'm comfortable with that change. Maybe because I've had I've had a long enough career already. I'm a couple of decades in the business, and I have learned that like this stuff changes every couple of years anyway. So, but we're in the middle of a big old reset at the moment. So I would encourage
Absolutely.
designers to like get closer to the metal, closer to the technology, less attached to their niche specialization. Don't think too much about current state, right, that we're in, like what the tools can do today, but keep sampling the current state so that you can chart it and then go, okay, what kind of a trajectory are we on? So I am again less interested in what we can vibe code today, and stuff like that is like can be quite a frustrating process when you get it to the like narrow end of it. I'm sure you've loads of experience with this, right? But
hmm
you also need to be able to look past that a little bit and say, okay, so this is what we can do today, but where is this going? And if you understand how the models work and their trajectory, where are we going to be in just 2 years? So
Right.
that is
Right.
also what I would advise people to try and figure out a little bit as well.
Absolutely. I think that's a great segue to like our next topic, which is starting to think about workflows, tools, and skills. And so I'm curious, what's the team over at Intercom using in terms of their, tooling? And then like, what's that workflow like right now? I mean, I'd imagine it's changed quite a bit from just being strictly in Figma and building Figma prototypes and maybe handing those off to product and engineering teams to maybe even doing something a little bit different. Curious to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, yeah. First, I'll try and give you a specific answer, but I will say like that at the base level, we encourage people to experiment broadly. There are no mandated tools or anything like that. There's obviously tons of new tools,
hmm
and in many ways, there are too many new tools, right? Is actually a problem for people, and in many ways, a kind of a divide and conquer attitude is helps there. Um, There's two high level approaches to what we're doing. One is like what I described already, which is shipping code improvements to the existing app, nibbling away at some of those little UI or quality issues, and
Hmm.
gradually going up the value chain to try and take on more and more, and getting to the point where we're like, oh, are we building entire like sections or components or interactive areas, and can we start building them or rebuilding them from scratch or whatever? So that's one trajectory of exploration. And the other, I guess, is what people would call vibe coding, right? Which is just like building a somewhat throwaway prototype to explore an idea, test an idea, or pitch an idea, like prove a point and capture it, right? Um,
Hmm.
to talk about the latter one a bit, that was like the second thing in the article. This the second thing that I talked about. I mean, yes, we're coming from a world where previous to now, a designer who had an idea would probably mock up like, okay, they had the idea in the head. You go from A to B to C to D. Right. Okay. That's 20 screens in a Figma artboard. And then you get those little connectors and you connect them together. And then you share the prototype and someone clicks on the hotspots on the PNGs and they imagine, what would it be like to use this tool for real? Right.
Right.
That's where we're coming from. So obviously now with vibe coding, you have much like higher definition, higher dynamic range of expression of your idea. So I really see it as like a just a better design artifacts that you can produce. You can also produce it like quickly. You can also be super loose and vague and just see like give me 5 versions and see what kind of rando ideas it sparks in you. Or, and I do think you have to then kind of wrestle it a bit, right? And like get it into submission and go, okay, now not just like yes, yes, confirm whatever you get out of the slot machine, but actually like using that to inform what your vision for the thing is and then capturing that. And that is interesting because I found, or I'm noticing among the team, that they're actually delivering at times extremely high levels of quality in the prototype in terms of how convincing it is. Like it looks like the real
Hmm.
product. It's not got like pink purple
Right.
banners or shad CN or whatever. And that's because we've
Sure.
given it like enough tooling. Or if you hammer on the thing enough and give it screenshots and Figma components and stuff, it can now do a good job
Right.
of making it look realistic. But a lot of our like more compelling vibe coded prototypes take like, on the order of a couple of days, or someone's hammering on it to a week to get it to like work really well and be really compelling, right? I
Hmm.
think that's a bit different to what most people think of when they think of like a one shot, throw in a 2-line prompt and see what you get out. It's still kind of gnarly work,
Yeah.
and it's still a bit like working with an engineer to fix all the dumb shit that's kind of broken and move things
Yeah.
around. It's just you're talking to the agent. So there definitely is this like the first 90% takes
Yeah.
90% of the time, and then the second 10% takes another 90% of the time, right? Because that last bit is so hard to get right. Um, but all those things said, what do we do with that then? That often gets shared around internally with like a loom or just a link to a prototype so that people can play and experiment with it. And sometimes those things kind of naturally go like mini viral or mentioned in a doc just get in front of the right people. Or even a couple of weeks
Right.
later, you're in a conversation and you're like, oh, let me pull this out. And so it just feels like a lot of our ideas are being brought to expression bottom up within the org a lot more frequently. And then we have those more readily available to pull on when the time comes. So it's not simply like step zero in the development of feature X that we have to like go and do in a linear fashion. A lot of it is influencing an idea generation. And it is just so much more compelling to be able to like type in the thing and hit backspace and select all and delete. And then,
Right.
then imagine what that would be like if it was a static series of PNGs stitched together. But I'll say one more thing on
Yes.
this actually, Adam, which is another interesting angle that I would love to see more designers experiment with is a very rapid iterative testing process using these prototypes. So yeah, you can use your
Mm.
vibe coded prototypes to go to your PM or your director of product or whatever and be like, check out my idea. Shouldn't we do this? Right. You can also
Yeah.
use it to go to customers and say, hi, I have a new version of our product. I would love you to use it. And I am talking like the designer who thought of it, vibe coded it, and sits down with the person. This is the collapsing
Yeah.
of roles into generalists that we're talking about. When they do that, let me back up 1 second just to highlight what we're replacing here. The process that we're replacing beforehand would have been stitch together PNGs in Figma, go to an engineer and say, hey, can we build a prototype that we can test with this? Because we can't test PNGs. Engineer builds it, fix all the bugs, then give it to a researcher. The researcher puts it out to a whole bunch of, customers or users or whatever. They test it a statistically significant number of times, because this is hard science that
Right.
we're doing here. And then they write a research report and everyone kind of reads the research report or whatever, right? Okay. That's convoluted process, to
Mm.
put it mildly. The new version is a designer conceives of vibe codes and puts this in front of their customers. And they say, okay, I just want you to click around and you can ask questions and you can cosplay at being a UX researcher. Maybe you're not the world's greatest, but you know what? You're directly watching the research, the user stumble through your design. And that is worth its weight in gold. Next, you
Yeah.
hang up from that call and you go, they really struggled with the publishing dropdown. You know what? Hey, cursor, can we change the publishing dropdown real quick? Boo, 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 boo. 20 minutes later, you're into your next session and you have an iterated version. And now you get to see if your next idea works a little bit better. And you do that
Mm.
3, 4, 5 times in an afternoon. Now, I will acknowledge that some classic, people who are really beholden to the process of old might pick holes in that and say, well, they're not a classically trained research. And is it enough people? I'm like, the signal a designer gets from seeing their stuff, getting to iterate in almost real time, and then continue to co-create with the customers is just way, way stronger. And we recently shipped a pretty major feature. We had our Pioneer event in New York a couple of weeks ago. Our tentpole feature
Yeah.
that was called Procedures, which is a natural language way of prompting Finn, our AI agent, to solve all these super complex queries. You're kind of giving it like a playbook to follow, like a prompt essentially. The
Hmm.
whole feature there was initially vibe coded and tested by one of our designers internally. And then he was able
Wow.
to take both the prototype and the customer evidence, from from the kind of guerrilla research work that he did. And that just became super compelling package. Like we can see it,
Yeah.
we can test it. You've got your demo there. I see what your users are saying. I'm sure there'll be a few little bits and bobs to figure out along the way, but holy shit, it feels like we're almost halfway there already. Let's get going. And so you start
Yeah.
to, this is the point I'm trying to eventually get to. You start to realize, wow, I have like a bunch more um, arrows in my quiver or whatever here that I can use
Right.
when I'm trying to influence or when I'm trying to direct the direction of the product. So okay, on the one hand, designers might be looking at these new tools and go, but, I draw rectangles for a living, and now my rectangle drawing is under threat. But I'm like, maybe, but the rectangle drawing was slow, arduous process anyway, and not really like what your brain, I hopefully was primarily taken up doing. And now you also get like this whole new area, whereas maybe before in a lot of companies, you're stuck in this mode of being handed tasks and you execute the tasks. And design is more of a
Right.
production function. I really think
Yeah.
there's an opportunity for design to become more of a strategic function because designers, I mean, PMs and a good like any, scrappy, high agency PM can go do the same thing I'm describing here, But I do think
Yeah.
designers have the skills and the time and the kind of remit as well to do a lot of it themselves and really own that.
Yeah. Oh, that is so brilliant. I love that you said all this because it's all the things I've been preaching and thinking about. Wow, where do we begin? First of all, love this idea how research is also evolving so much, right? I think one of the challenges with research for many companies in the past, because culturally, just getting research to even happen in the first place was really, really hard. Many companies don't even have a UX
Yeah.
research team, and if they even do any research, it is beholden on the for the designer to figure that stuff out. Um, but it was a long, as you said, arduous process that just took lots and lots of time. And now, and not in time, right? Time is money too, because it's like people's time, resources, all of it. But now we can move so much faster at such a lower cost that we can move to prototype very, very quickly and then go and test it very, very quickly.
Mm.
And that I think is like a fundamental paradigm shift, not just on the development side of where AI is like having a pretty big impact, as you alluded to, but also on that initial research side. So that is all extraordinarily exciting. The thing I
Hey,
wanted to
I have a
come
question
to,
for you, Adam. So we're all
yeah,
sitting here, and like lots of times when I talk to people about that, we're all like nodding along in violent agreement with each other. Why do you
yeah,
think then so many people feel this sense of like, but I don't have permission, or I need permission, or but maybe
mm,
I'll hold off and wait? I mean, I have even heard designers say, there's so many tools and stuff. I'm going to wait until the dust settles and then I'll learn about vibe coding or whatever. And
yeah,
I worry about that mindset because I feel like it might be a learned helplessness kind of mindset. Whereas I think that
yeah,
maybe designers need to shift into more of and there's lots to talk about this as well, but high agency type mindset at the moment. Like, what's going on
yeah.
there? Do you think people genuinely don't have permission or are unwilling to step out of
Yeah,
their lane a bit? Or
I think there's a lot of that. I think there's the kind of the mentality of old where in, an organization, you're told what to do and like you shouldn't step out of line or break any of the rules. And I think a lot of people are maybe stuck in that world. I was never one of those people when I was working in the corporate world. I was always a bit of a rebel. I think it also made me extremely successful in my career. But I think we're in also a new era. We have been presented with an unbelievable tool in our hands, better than any tool maybe we've ever received, right? You are old enough like me to remember the evolution of building maybe websites in like Photoshop, all the way into what became Sketch, and
yeah,
then it evolved into Figma, and now evolving even more, right? And so I think designers are really great at adapting and learning new tools. But now we're being presented with a tool that is so impactful that it changes almost everything about our job, but in a good way, right? In a way that amplifies it in a serious, impactful way. So I think people, my advice to people is to not be afraid to try and to go out there. And yes, like you said earlier, just go experiment. Take a weekend. Don't take time out of the day that maybe, a company's paying for. Just take your weekend or night and go try to do something and bring it back to the team and show them what you made. And I think that will actually have a huge impact. Um, I know we're running short on time, so I'm gonna wrap things up. Quick rapid fire question for you. Tooling. What are you guys using like for your vibe coding? And I don't even like to call it vibe coding because it feels almost like not giving it enough credit for your coding and
context
engineering work.
engineering, we can call it, right, instead. That's
Yeah,
yeah.
design engineering. Yes.
Uh,
So what are you using for that? And then also for like, how's that flowing between your Figma files and all that?
yeah, yeah. I mean, as I said, each to their own kind of thing. So we do allow people to choose their own tools. And one of the things that I think is nice about the current setup as well is, especially if you're coding, or dealing with like markdown files and stuff like that, it's very easy to swap between different tools and try them. Um, I think that for vibe coding, there's probably, it depends, again, on like a lot for landing pages and stuff like that, a lot of Lovable. Figma Make, I think just because it's the tool that's there gets a lot of use. And I've heard a lot of positive things about that, like recently as well. I know that a whole bunch of people, myself and included, are kind of like Claude Code aficionados, and so that's just
Sure.
a fun one as well. Um, but the kind of, if there is one blessed answer, it's Cursor,
Hmm.
because I think it gives people a familiar all-in-one package to like navigate the code, see the code, and guide the code, and so it feels like a complete thing. Also, we have a Cursor rules thing, which is like an agents.md file, or it's like rules for it to follow, and it's actually
Mm,
specifically for designers. So one of the
mm,
things it does is put certain guardrails in place, like saying, don't go too far into the back end. Don't like change any of these things. Like, I
yeah,
am a designer. I'm here to change front end stuff, so it
sure.
attempts to put some guardrails around what the agent will do. And that's been
Mm,
very helpful. We have also made improvements. We had little workshops internally to get designers set up with local dev environments, because that can be like gnarly, and Docker and command line stuff and stuff like that.
sure.
And actually that led to a whole bunch of UX improvements to how our local environment works. And it's all been packaged up much more nicely into a one-click thing and so on. So a bunch of like tooling to get, the thing that like our attitude going into it was, let's just try and let's just keep going and chomping away at like what it is we would have to do to fulfill all of our dreams here and find out where the friction points are. And you find like, oh, it was pretty, it took a couple of hours to get my dev environment set up. So you can go and make that a little bit easier for the next people and so on. But you find
Right.
that you can just like progress to the natural point of friction or of cultural pushback or of technical barrier or whatever it might be. Um,
Yeah.
we my answer is a bit out of order, I realize now. If I was to tell it chronologically what we did, we first of all set up some vibe coding things just to like make sure that everyone had touched the technology, felt the
Right.
superpower a little bit.
Yeah, the magic.
Get past that first kind of thing first of all, and then we set up the dev environments, and then we encouraged everyone to ship a PR, and then we encouraged everyone to keep going and see how much deeper that they could go and so on.
Yeah.
That plus I think doing a lot of sharing, and this is just internally on Slack. If someone, we have a medium-sized team, you can't keep up with all of the work that everyone is doing. But if someone has an interesting AI technique that they use, they will share their piece of work and explain why. So we're trying to engender this like culture internally of sharing. I think that's good because you get to learn from a lot more people than just what you're doing yourself. But you also kind of like, if your colleagues are all posting this other stuff, it just moves the Overton window of what you think yourself, your role is. And you're like, I got to be doing more of this stuff. And so, little things like that we try to encourage as well.
That's fantastic. This has been amazing, Emmett. Thank you so much for sharing all this knowledge, wisdom, expertise. It is so cool to see the things that you guys are doing over at Intercom. I truly, truly believe it is the future of design teams. I'm hoping a lot of people and other design leaders are inspired by this, and organizations more broadly are inspired by this, because I do see this amazing paradigm shift that's happening. And I could, for one, could not be more excited, just because like everything in my career, from learning how to design to learning how to code to bringing in interaction design and all these other pieces are just coming together in this beautiful, package now. And I'd be remiss not to mention a quick promo. B150, we are actually starting to offer consulting services for design teams that want to learn how to do this. And so if you are interested in that, please reach out to us. But Emmett, thank you so much for sharing all of this knowledge, expertise. It was so helpful. Is there anywhere people can follow along with you that is the best place to kind of see the things you're up to?
Yeah, for sure. Well, you can check out Fin, which is our AI agent for customer service on fin.ai. That is the main project that we're working on. We have a Substack at ideas.fin.ai, and you can follow me on Twitter at ThoughtWax. I have a blog, thoughtwax.com. I write on our Substack all the time as well. I'll keep posting stuff on LinkedIn. I know you were talking about LinkedIn earlier, but it is a place where, other people are also figuring all this stuff out in real time. So yeah, there's a few opportunities there.
Amazing. Well, thank you again, Emmett. We really appreciate your time.
Yeah, this was fun. Thanks, Adam.
No mask, no front, and turn nothing to something. Now everybody want it.